Laying the Foundations for Reading, Phonemic Awareness, and Phonograms. As we begin, it's important that we understand the steps to learning how to read. These begin with phonemic awareness and the learning of the phonograms. However, before we examine those steps, I want to go back even farther and discover, how do students learn to speak, or how do children learn to speak? Let's examine for a moment oral language development. Did you know that babies, when they are babbling, babble all the sounds in all the known languages in the world? So some of those strange sounds may be sounds in another language. However, as they babble, they're also listening, and they listen to the sounds that are being spoken around them. And they then begin to narrow their babble down to the sounds of the language that they are hearing. So please note, babies begin to learn to speak with sounds. They then begin to combine those sounds into short words, such as ma and pa or me. And then they begin to combine those words into short sentences, or to develop some two-syllable words, more juice, me cup. And slowly they begin to build those words into sentences and longer and more complex words. They do not go from not saying anything to speaking in sentences overnight. They're very, very systematic about how they learn to speak. Now, they do this innately, by the way. The human brain is just wired to learn how to speak. By the time a child gets to kindergarten or to school, those students are focused on words. They're no longer focused on sounds. They're focused on finding out the names for everything in their environment and for developing more vocabulary. Many of these students are still missing some of the speech sounds. They might be missing the l sound or the th sound. And that's very normal. And many of those kids, you'll probably have observed, are not even really interested in those sounds, because what they're interested in at this stage is really the words and acquiring those words. And so we're going to talk in a little bit how to help students to add those sounds to their spoken language as well. Now, when we're teaching reading, it's really important that we respect the stages of language development that children are in, and that we lead them on to the next stage. It's also important that we understand how to build a natural progression into reading, and not just expect students to jump into reading as if it's something that they're going to be able to do naturally. In fact, it's been shown through a lot of brain research that students do not have any natural centers in the brain for learning how to read. That is something that has to be taught, and it is a very complex process in the brain, whereas learning to speak is a very natural process. So we're going to discuss the stages of how do we lead students to become readers. Now, reading development begins with phonemic awareness. It begins by teaching students that the words that they say are made up of sounds, to go and to take those words and to break them into sounds. Then we can teach them the individual phonograms and how to read those sounds. Then they can learn to blend those phonograms into one and two-syllable words, then into short phrases, and then short sentences, and then more and more complex words, and more complex sentences and paragraphs, and then stories, and being able to comprehend longer texts. So let's begin at the beginning with phonemic awareness. You can find more information about phonemic awareness on page 34 of your teacher's training manual. Phonemic awareness is a clear understanding that words are comprised of individual sounds that have been glued or blended together. Now, it's the concept of taking and helping students understand that every word in English is some combination of the 45 sounds of English rearranged in some way, and that's what all words are made out of, sounds recombined in different forms. Students who lack phonemic awareness often appear to be guessing wildly when they are reading. Now, maybe you've experienced this with a student. They're reading along and they come across a word, and out of the blue they say a word that seems to make no sense to the text and doesn't have anything to do with how the word even looks or appears. These students don't really understand the relationship of sounds. So phonemic awareness is exactly the place they need to begin. Let's talk about how to begin to develop phonemic awareness. The first place is to develop a kinesthetic awareness of sounds. So let's move the awareness of sounds beyond just hearing to also feeling how they're made or seeing how the sounds are made. I like to do this by discussing how the sounds are made, showing students a mirror and letting them see and watch their mouths, be able to compare sounds, and to learn about voiced and unvoiced sounds, to be able to understand that their voice box and what parts of their mouth play into the process. So let's do a little bit of this using some of the activities on page 35 of the teacher's training manual. I'd like you to say the sound P with me. Okay? P. What did you do to say P? That's right, you used your lips and they popped together. P. And put your hand in front of your mouth. P. Can you feel the air coming out? Now let's compare that with B. P, B. What's the difference between P, B? Your mouth is in the exact same position, so why do they sound different? Well, if you place your hand on your throat, you'll notice that when you say P, there's no vibration. But when you say B, you're vibrating your voice box. So these are a voiced and unvoiced pair. Now, what's important for students is just to begin to play with this and to feel and be able to describe a little bit of what they're doing to make different sounds. This develops an awareness for students of how those sounds are formed. After students have a bit of a kinesthetic awareness of sounds, then you can move into gluing words together auditorily. I like to begin with compound words. So here's a few examples. Let's take two words such as rain, bow, and glue them back together. Rainbow. Foot, ball, football. Afternoon, afternoon. Now, sometimes with students who are more kinesthetic, I will actually have them move while they'll do this. I'll say, I want you to step and say afternoon, and then I'll have you slide afternoon and glue them together. So you can get students moving. You can have a lot of fun with this. After your students have learned compound words, then you can move on to helping them glue together the sounds. Begin with one-syllable words. So, for example, let's take the word dog and unglue it. D-O-G. Dog. Now let me give you a few and see if you can blend them or glue them back together. B-oy. Boy. K-at. Cat. Very good. Now, there's lots of games you can play with gluing and ungluing words. One of my favorites is to play Simon Says. So what I'll do is I'll tell students, okay, I'm going to unglue a word or segment a word, and I want you to blend it back together and do the action. So let's try this. J-U-M-P. Jump. S-p-in. Spin. S-it. Sit. And little children love this sort of activity. You can also do a treasure hunt where you say, I'm going to unglue a word and I want you to run around the room and find that object. K-o-t, coat. At, hat, and they can bring it back to you. Now, if you notice, what students are doing when they're gluing words back together is the skill of reading minus the text. They are taking those individual sounds and having to blend them back together into a word. Now, this skill is foundational to reading, and let me tell you just a few stories to help you understand how foundational. First of all, I have had adults who have taken our teacher training courses who say that blending those words back together is very, very difficult for them. And all of those adults have also said that they really struggle with reading. In addition, I have had teachers come to me who have said that they have a student who knows all of the phonograms, they can read the phonograms, but they're still not able to read a sentence or a text or words very fluently. And when they've gone back and they've done these phonemic awareness activities for a week, they have seen, or we have heard of, students who are then able to go from phonemic awareness activities to reading chapter books within a week or two, because the key element was being able to blend words back together, and that was what they were missing. So these activities are foundational, and it's a really important place to start, especially if you're remediating a struggling student or if you're beginning with a new reader. Once students can glue words or blend words back together, then you can practice having the students segment the words. And begin by having students segment one-syllable words. You could maybe lay some objects on a table and say, I want you to segment the word, and I will point to the correct object. Now, This is spelling in reverse. Here they're taking a word and they're breaking it into its individual sounds. Once students can segment and blend words, then you can move to manipulating words. Oftentimes in curriculum, what you're going to find is that phonemic awareness activities are finding the initial sound on a word and being able to identify what does this word start with, or what sound does this word end with. Now notice, in order to accomplish that activity, you have to be able to segment the word. So this is a little bit more advanced, and it is a good idea to practice identifying initial and final sounds with students. Also, many phonemic awareness activities in curriculum will revolve around rhyming. Now, rhyming is a good skill, once again, to practice. However, rhyming is very difficult for many students because now not only do you have to segment the word, you have to segment off the last vowel sound and last consonant sound, and you have to know where to segment it in order to decide if the word rhymes or not. In fact, for some students who struggle with auditory processing, rhyming can be so difficult that they may not get it for a couple years. And I've spoken with some speech and language pathologists who have said that that's true. And those students can just go ahead. They can learn to read just fine, even if they struggle with rhyming, because rhyming is not a defining skill for being able to have a solid phonemic awareness understanding. If you would like some more activities to practice phonemic awareness, these begin on pages 37 through 40 of your teacher's training manual. There's a lot of games in here that you can use with your students. There's ideas about how to engage your students about the sounds of the language. And I should also say it's important that you're reading to your students rhymes and, for example, Dr. Seuss books, because these are also a fun way for students to develop a sense of the sounds of the language. We are now ready to talk about phonograms. What is a phonogram? Well, phono literally means sound, and gram means picture. So a phonogram is a picture of a sound. Now, this is different from how most of us learned to read. Most of us learned the letters, and we learned the letter names. But this is a picture of the sounds a, aw. This is a picture of the sound oi. This is a picture of the sound I, and this is a picture of the sound A. Notice a phonogram in English can have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 letters, and these groups of letters are working together to say and to represent a sound. I do not recommend pairing the phonograms with pictures, and the reason is because when we pair them with pictures, we create an oversimplification. Notice A says a, and ah. So if we pair the letter A with an apple, we give the impression to the student that A says only one sound, a. And then when they go out and they begin to look at words and they see that A says A and ah, we have to tell them that's an exception, or that's something you're going to learn next year, or some other nonsense which is really confusing to the student. It's also important that we don't pair phonograms with pictures in this way. The philosophy behind pictures that are inlaid over the letters in this way is that the student is supposed to think, that's an A, it reminds me of an apple. An apple starts with a. Notice here they have to segment the sound off, and therefore that says a. Rather, we want to create a direct memory link so that when students see the phonogram, they know instantaneously that it says a, ah. This is the visual representation of the sound. It's also important that we begin with lowercase letters. Too often in our culture, we believe that students should learn uppercase letters first. We somehow think that it's easier for them. I don't know where this myth came from because it's not easier for them. In fact, what you'll notice is that 98% of all that we read and write is in lowercase. We only use uppercase at the beginning of the sentence or in proper nouns. So we need to teach students first the lowercase letters because this is what will open up texts to them and open up words, and then teach them uppercase letters later. It's also important that we teach the sounds and not the letter names first. So when we teach students D-O-G, that does nothing to help them read the word dog. However, when they know the phonograms say D-O-G, then they can apply their phonemic awareness skills and blend D-O-G back together for dog. So teaching the sounds first and not the names. Now, what I like to do when I teach is to teach the lowercase letters and their sounds, and then later go back and teach the uppercase letters and their names and how they relate to the lowercase letters, and then we have all that information. Now, some teachers like to teach the names right from the beginning, but I have a word of caution for you, and that is that so many of us are so ingrained with letter names that rather than saying and reinforcing the sounds for our students, we'll find ourselves saying and reinforcing the names, and that generates a lot of confusion for students. Are these about the names or about the sounds? And since sounds are what we need to learn how to read, I highly recommend beginning with just the sounds and then later going back and teaching the names. Now, I also suggest that we don't take this to extremes, because if you don't teach students the names, they'll go to the eye doctor and read this as e, f, p. No, the names are important culturally, so don't mishear me. They're important for communicating spellings over the telephone or to one another, and they're a large part of how we communicate about language, but they should be saved for a slightly later stage. The second half of kindergarten is a good time to learn the letter names. It's also important that we teach all the sounds for a phonogram right from the beginning. Now, this phonogram was actually the beginning of my journey with the logic of English. You see, I had two little boys who I was teaching how to read. They were my sons, and I taught them that this letter says S, as in sand, sick, list, and hiss. This is what my teachers taught me. This is what the phonics program we were using taught. And then my sons went ahead and they misread is as is, and his as hiss, and was as was, and on and on and on. And because I was trained as a teacher and took reading methods classes, I was thinking these boys are not getting their sight words. I would say to them, I'm sorry, honey, that's not is, that's is. It's an exception. And for a year, they read it as is. Now, were they wrong? No, they were doing exactly what I told them. However, S really says two sounds. It says S and Z. Now, say these sounds for a moment to yourself. S, Z. What is your mouth doing as you say them? That's right, your mouth is in the same position. So why do they sound different? Put your hand on your throat and say them again. S, Z. That's right, they're a voiced and unvoiced pair. So what's going on here is that these are related sounds. Now, I have developed a theory. There are some students who are very intuitive, and I've taught many of those students to read. So when you say to them, when they misread is, and you say to them, no, that's an exception, that says is, they just seem to go on. They seem to get it. And this is my theory. Those intuitive students find the approximation to be enough. Their mouth is in approximately the same position, and maybe they don't even notice the difference in those sounds. They're able to just intuit it and go on. However, logical literal students who are engineers and scientists and mathematicians, they see the difference. They hear the difference right from the time they're 3 or 4 years old. And they don't want to let that go. If you said it said S, then it says S, until they either prove you wrong or the language crazy or something like that. And so these students are doing what they're told, and all they need is all the information. They need to know that this has two sounds, S and Z. Now, one last fact about this phonogram that you might be interested to know. When I have one table, to make it plural, I have many tables. When I have one chair, I make it plural, many chairs. If we include the plurals, S says Z 70% of the time. So is that an exception? No way. Rather, it's an oversimplification that we've all been taught. Let's look at this phonogram. Now, I was taught that this says ch, as in chin, champion, and chapel. And I actually remember the day that I was in school where I was sitting when I learned the spelling word school, and I was sitting there going, stool, stool. English is so stupid. And, CH also says k, as in school, character, and scholar. And it says sh, as in chef, Chicago, and machine. With this phonogram, what's fascinating is that there's something we can know about the three sounds ch, k, and sh. Have any of you watched the Scripps Spelling Bee on television? What I find so fascinating about the spelling bee is that these young students are spelling these words that are very big, and I don't even know the meaning to most of them. And yes, they've worked very, very hard to do so. But what's also interesting is they can ask the moderator for a clue. And what is the clue that they can ask the moderator? What is the origin of the word? When they hear that the origin is from Greek and they hear the sound k in it, they know that it's spelled with a CH because that is the Greek spelling of the sound k. And when they hear that a word has the sh sound in it and it's from French, they know that it's spelled with a CH as well, such as chef or Chicago or machine. And so these students are not rotely memorizing all these words. They are understanding something about them, and they are understanding the language, not rotely memorizing. Early childhood development and literacy. Many parents ask me, what do I do with the little children, the 2- and 3-year-old kids? How do I help prepare them for learning how to read? Now, I have been learning a great deal in the recent months about this very topic. And in fact, my greatest teacher has been a 2.5-year-old named Melina, who happens to be my niece. And as I've been interacting with Melina, I've made some real discoveries about how to prepare students for reading. First of all, remember what we talked about in oral language development? Young children are fascinated by sounds. Children who are learning how to speak are fascinated by the sounds that they are trying to acquire to say words. So we can build on this very, very naturally to teach them some of the sounds. Now, I want to be very careful. I do not believe in formal reading instruction for babies and toddlers and preschooler, early childhood, 3, maybe 4 years old, 5 years old is when we should start formal instruction. So I don't believe we should be teaching the little ones explicitly how to read, but we can begin to give them the tools to learn how to read. And oftentimes they are fascinated by these tools. So for example, many of you at home probably have magnetic letters, attached to your refrigerators and things. And what we tend to do with these magnetic letters is to teach little kids that this is a T and this is a G. And one very, very simple change we can make is to teach students or teach little kids, children, that this says T and this is a G, J. Now, when we teach them that, they begin to ask the question, what does that say when they see a letter? And that's very, very key for their beginning reading development. Because as you'll notice, this is phonemic awareness at work. And they can learn even at 1.5 or 2 to ask the question, what does this say? And then you can just read the sounds to the letters in the environment around them. Another idea is to take a book like Doodling Dragons. Doodling Dragons is my new children's book, which unfolds the sounds for A through Z. And by reading some rhymes such as cards and dice, crackers, rice, circus clowns, casting crowns, k, s, the students become exposed to this phonogram saying 2 sounds, k and s, in a very informal and fun way. We can also point out phonograms in the words around our children. Rather than focusing solely on the fact that this word says this, we can point out the phonograms and what they're saying in the words that the children see around them. So for example, many children have a box of Cheerios in their home, and we could teach them that, oh, look, here's the ch, k, sh phonogram. And then we could say, it's saying ch here. In fact, we could go ahead and we can underline it. That says ch. Now, many little kids will get excited to go around and find the ch, k, sh phonogram in other words. And maybe you could find them in your pantry. Maybe you could find them on other boxes of toys or other things, and help the children begin to look for them. Go on little phonogram hunts together around your home. Many young children will also ask you to write a word for them. And rather than simply writing the word, you can take the approach of sounding out the word while you write it. So for example, if a 2 or 3-year-old child comes and says, will you write the word sun, or will you write my name? You could write it like this. S, n. And you can break it up, and then you can say s, n, sun. Now, we're not asking the child to write the word or to be able to sound it out, but it's been amazing to me to see some 2-year-olds then repeat to me, that says sun. And they get really excited about those sounds and how those sounds are coming together into words. Another idea for you is to buy a set of sandpaper letters. You can buy sandpaper letters in manuscript or in cursive, and you can have these around. They're very tactile. And so with very young children, you can say to them, oh, look at this. You can feel this. This is a z. Now, remember, with little kids, it's really, really important not to use letter names because it's the sounds that are going to contribute to them becoming strong readers and spellers. It's the sounds that are going to help them to be able to read words in the environment around them.